In this video, we're going to introduce the main structures and functions of the lymphatic system, which we can think of as a counterpart to the circulatory system, in that both consist of a network of tubes that circulate through the body and primarily exist for transportation purposes. The distinction in function, however, is what they transport. So, unlike the circulatory system that is made of circulatory blood vessels like arteries and veins, the vessels in the lymphatic system are appropriately called lymphatic vessels, and the primary function of your lymphatic system is that this is the primary method of transportation for your white blood cells rather than for your red blood cells. And even though everywhere in the body where we can find arteries and veins, you can also find lymphatic vessels, the two remain physically distinct from one another. So we can accurately say that the lymphatic system runs parallel to the circulatory system, in that you can find both blood vessels and lymphatic vessels everywhere in the body, but the two do not directly contact one another most of the time. The main distinction in the structure, however, is how lymphatic vessels actually work. Unlike the circulatory system that relies upon the heart to be the primary power source for blood to move, the lymphatic system has no central organ that acts as a pump, and therefore we can consider most of the lymphatic vessels of the lymphatic system to be more similar to veins. In fact, that's why we often use the word lymphatic veins for the larger vessels in the lymphatic system, such as the one that we see here. There are two structural similarities that lymphatic veins have to circulatory veins, the first of which is that every lymphatic vein or large lymphatic vessel is surrounded by a skeletal muscle. So in the same way that veins cannot rely on the heart for propulsion because they are too far away from the heartbeat, lymphatic vessels have no pump whatsoever, and so the propulsion of the fluid that moves through your lymphatic vessels, which is what we call lymph, is driven by the contraction of skeletal muscles on the outside. So whenever you move any of the limbs in your body, the skeletal muscles will compress the lymphatic vessels, causing the fluid, lymph, which is a combination of white blood cells and hydrophobic nutrients such as fat and cholesterol, and when the skeletal muscles compress the lymphatic veins, it pushes lymph through them in the same way that skeletal muscles cause blood to flow through veins. Now, just like with veins as well, it's important that lymphatic vessels have a way to prevent the backward flow of lymph to ensure that lymph only flows in a single direction. And just like with veins as well, as we can see here, we can see that lymphatic veins also have one-way valves that open in order to allow lymph to flow in a specific direction, but close in order to prevent lymph from being able to flow backward, to ensure that your white blood cells are consistently transported in a single direction around the lymphatic system in the body. Now, when we get to specific tissue locations or specific organs, lymphatic veins will once again split into smaller vessels, which are just like what we call circulatory capillaries in the circulatory system. We also call smaller lymphatic vessels that supply each of the major organs in the body with white blood cells. We call these lymphatic capillaries as well. And we have actually seen an example of lymphatic capillaries in the digestive system before. These are what we call your lacteals. So if you remember from the digestive system, when we look inside of the structure of villi, inside of each villus is found a lacteal in addition to circulatory capillaries, and these lacteals allow your white blood cells access to the small intestine, as well as act as a way to absorb hydrophobic nutrients such as fats and cholesterol, so that these can be transported out of your small intestine without accidentally ending up in the blood. Now, eventually, if we follow all of the lymphatic veins, these lymphatic veins are going to converge on the organs within the lymphatic system that are the closest thing to centralized structures. Although calling them centralized is a little bit of a misnomer, because we can find hundreds of these spread throughout the body, and if we zoom in on these structures here, they look something like this. So this is a structure that we call a lymph node. And even though the lymphatic system is lacking a central organ like the heart, lymphatic nodes, or lymph nodes for short, are the closest thing that we can think of as central structures of the lymphatic system. For one, these act as the primary repository for any white blood cells that are inactive. So whenever white blood cells, especially specialized white blood cells like your B cells that produce antibodies, whenever these white blood cells are inactive, basically they sit in these chambers of a lymph node and wait until they are activated by other white blood cells. Now, the white blood cells that are active have the job of circulating your lymphatic system and hunting down any pathogens that are not supposed to be in the body. Now, not all of the pathogens that are circulating through your body are immediately destroyed. Some of them are actually captured by white blood cells that actually bring them back to your lymph nodes. And part of the reason why is that lymph nodes serve as the major pathogen destruction and recycling centers, so that pathogens can be destroyed, preventing them from making you sick, but so that all of their nutrients can then be recycled and transferred into your blood. So we can see here that lymph nodes are also the major intersection points, or the major connection points between the lymphatic and circulatory systems. So this is the other location where both nutrient and water exchange happens. So obviously your white blood cells, when they become active and start hunting down pathogens, are going to need a lot of energy, and therefore it's important that all of your lymph nodes have access to the circulatory system, so that the blood that flows in and out can provide nutrients and water to all of the white blood cells in a lymph node, and also take away all of the carbon dioxide and waste that your white blood cells produce. And this is why we say lymph nodes, even though there isn't a single lymph node in the body. Each of these acts as basically a central location where white blood cells can wait until being activated, act as the major disposal location for pathogens in the body, as well as serve as an exchange interface, so that all of the white blood cells in a lymph node can be well fed with nutrients and well hydrated with water, allowing them to function. Now, just because the lymphatic system is the primary method of transportation, this does not automatically mean that white blood cells cannot actually use the circulatory system. In fact, as we see here, as long as the blood vessel is large enough, for example, if it's one of the larger arteries or veins, we can see that white blood cells can just as easily move through larger blood vessels. But again, the lymphatic system represents the primary transportation network, because if we follow your lymphatic vessels for enough time, eventually we will reach one of these lymph nodes that act as the central structures. This concludes our series on the specific types of blood and lymphatic vessels within the body. Now, before you move on to the next video series that focuses entirely on capillaries, you can take a look at the case study below that focuses on the importance of skeletal muscles with veins, although this technically applies to the lymphatic system as well. So see if you can try this case study that looks at what happens when the valves of veins and lymphatic vessels as well become warped and no longer function properly, and then try a few of the practice problems below to see if you can test your knowledge of the difference in structures and functions between arteries, veins, and lymphatic vessels.